Well, hello, my kindred spirits. How in the world are y'all doing today? I hope that everybody is doing great. It is a rainy day here in North Carolina. It's going to be about a 75% chance of it raining all day, so I had plans to go outside and do all of my gardening today, but instead we're going to make our videos today and then do the gardening tomorrow. So I'm excited to get my hands out in that dirt again. But how have you been? I wanted to tell you right quick how much I appreciate y'all, because you could watch so many different channels and so many other people to kind of soothe you or entertain you, but so many of you have come back to this channel, and I sincerely appreciate that, and that means a lot to me. So I just wanted to tell you thank you for that, and I love you for it, so thank you. Now, today we're going to talk about a series of books by Maud Hard Lovelace, and they're called the Betsy-Tacy-Tib series of books. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them first, and then we're going to read a little snippet about them. But first, let me say that these were written in 1940. The first one was written in 1940, and then so they are still in the public domain as far as I can see. And what that means is there's still a copyright on these books. And there is nothing I would like better to do than to read to y'all. Oh my goodness. If I could have a channel in which I only read my collection of children's books to you, I would do that, because it was one of my favorite things as a kid to be read to. My children, I loved reading to them. There is a book by Jim Trelease called the Read Aloud Handbook, in which he advocates reading aloud to your children up until the night before their wedding, because what it does is it draws your children and people to you. And your imagination is what is at work when you're hearing books voiced or stories voiced. If you just see me here talking, you're not going to see the picture. You're going to picture that in your own head. And so that fosters imagination so beautifully. And if I could do anything, if I could give any of you one piece of advice if you're raising little children, it's this. Keep them away from screens at all costs and read to them as much as possible. I know you are so busy, little mama. I know it. And you're about to lose your mind sometimes because you just need a little sanity break. But I promise you, if you will read to those babies, they and you will be much better off for it. So, okay, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent there, but I do think it's so important. So, oh my gosh. With that said, I've been going through my collection, and I'm trying to find some old books that are out of the public domain that do not have copyright anymore, so that I can read them to you. And I tried to read a couple of books to you last October that were Halloween books that I loved as a child, and I got a copyright strike. So I can't do that. I'd have to be so careful, and I hate it. If I were to read the books and maybe give commentary, I might could get away with it, but I'm just not sure. Maybe somebody who's watching this knows better than me, and if you could advise me, I would certainly appreciate it. But from everything that I've seen and looked up, if it has a copyright, you have to be really careful to read someone else's work all the way through. So I just want to let you know that, but I'm working on it. I'm working on something I can do for you. So again, let me tell you about these wonderful, wonderful little books by Maud Hard Lovelace. I discovered the Betsy-Tacy-Tib books. It was probably when I was about 8 years old, and again, like every little book I've discovered, either it was in the public library in Waverly, Tennessee, which my father took us to every Saturday morning, or it could have been at our little school library where Miss Corbin, she wasn't a Mrs., Miss Corbin would be, she was the librarian at school. She smelled so good. She had short black hair. I think I've told y'all about her before. Short black hair. She was dressed to the nines. We loved her. She wore this pretty cherry red lipstick, and a lot of times her fingernails and earrings would match, and she wore the prettiest clothes. And if you got to sit in Miss Corbin's lap or hug her, she had a perfume that stuck on you, and then you would smell like her for the rest of the day. Oh my goodness, my friends, I am so sorry. I guess this is menopause brain, I'm not sure, but if you get me to talking about books and little children and my mama, I get weepy recently, and I'm tough. I've always prided myself on being tough. Not anymore, so forgive me. Oh my goodness. All right, let's get back to the Betsy-Tacy-Tib books. They're about 3 little girls and their lives and their friendship, but they go all the way from being, I believe they started at 8 or 9 years old, all the way to when Betsy got married. Now, I didn't own these books as a child. I only got them from the library, but after I started having my own children, I thought, you know, I need to have that collection for them because they're so wonderful. They're so wonderful. And so I bought these when my kids were really, really small. My daughter read through all of them. I tried to read the first couple of them aloud to all 3 children, but my boys weren't interested all that much in them, and that's totally fine. But I read them to my daughter some, but then more importantly, she got to read them too by herself, and she developed a huge love for them too. Also, Lois Linsky illustrated a lot of these books for Maud Hard Lovelace, and Lois Linsky was a prolific writer back in the 40s. She wrote books like Bayou Billy and Strawberry Girl, and they were another childhood favorite. So if you may already know about these books, but if you don't, I encourage you to look for them. I don't even know if you can find them in the library anymore, but you can find them online, either through thrift books, you can buy them used, or Amazon still sells them new. So I encourage you to look for them if you have children. Now, so let me tell you a little bit about these books, and I'm going to read you the first chapter from the first book. But I want to tell you, I want to show this to you first of all. You can see those little simple illustrations by Lois Linsky. That just takes me right back to seeing them because they're very, very simple. They just give you a little idea, and it shows the little girls here, Betsy-Tacy-Tib, and they're just so precious. And this is a foreword in this book, and it says, when I was about 9, my mother saw an ad in the paper for a series of books by Maud Hard Lovelace. She showed it to me and asked if I would be interested. She wanted some assurance, I guess, that if she ordered these books, I would read them. The ad from Bamberger's department store in Newark, New Jersey was intriguing. It promised stories about 2 girls, Betsy and Tacy, who are best friends. So I told my mother, yes, I would like to read them. I understood that this was different than taking books out of the library. If I started a library book and I didn't like it, I could take it back. This was a commitment. We didn't just go to the bookstore to buy children's books then, though I was proud of the shelves of grown-up books in our living room. My mother was always reading, usually the latest bestsellers, and my father unwound at night with mysteries. A neat stack of books sat on each of their bedside tables. Mine too, except they're not neat. There's a lot of them. Though I owned all of the Oz books and would eventually buy a Nancy Drew mystery each Saturday, I loved our weekly trips downtown to the main branch of the public library, where I climbed a set of rickety outside stairs to get into the children's room. Once there, I would sit in the floor sniff the books, and browse. At home, I waited anxiously for the Betsy-Tacy books to arrive, and when they did, I sniffed them to see if they smelled as good as the books I borrowed from the public library. They did, even better. I'd always liked to read, but until the Betsy-Tacy books, I'd never found stories about girls who were anything like me and my friends. Even though I knew from the start the books took place in the olden days, the characters felt so real it didn't matter what they wore or how they fixed their hair or that they thought $1 was a lot of money. In fact, I found these details fascinating, and I couldn't wait to read the next book or the one after that, following Betsy Ray's life. Betsy sometimes made mistakes, and sometimes she talked too much. She could be stubborn or angry or sad. Best of all, she had a lot of imagination. I totally identified with her. She was a girl who'd been making up stories all her life, just like me. Until then, I was sure I was the only one. But unlike Betsy, I never told anyone about my stories, and I never wrote them down either. I'd think about Betsy and her friends as I went to bed at night, wondering what would happen next. I did that too. I didn't care that they were only 5 years old at the beginning of the book, and I never felt that I was reading a baby book. Besides, I knew that Betsy and Tacy and Tib were going to grow older in each book, and I knew that they'd soon be older than me, and I didn't want to miss a minute. I needed to know as much about them as I possibly could. I longed to know them as well as they knew each other. The following year, my mother surprised me with the next 3 books in the series. Now Betsy was a teenager. Given the chance, I'd have jumped right into the pages of those books to share the famous Sunday night lunches at Betsy's house. And afterward, to gather around the piano with Betsy and her friends singing for hours. It seemed to me that Betsy had a perfect life, good friends, and a warm, secure, and loving family where she knew someone was always on her side. While I didn't feel the darker undercurrents I sometimes felt in my own family or even in my own friendships, I still believed in Betsy. I laughed and cried and dreamed with her. I loved these books too much to ever do a book report on them. They weren't for sharing. They were for keeping deep inside. There goes a helicopter. Did Betsy inspire me to become a writer? After all, she knew when she was very young that's exactly what she was going to be when she grew up, and she never changed her mind. But writing wasn't on my mind when I was reading about her, so I would have to answer probably not. Although, who can say where inspiration really comes from? I don't know why I didn't get to read the last 3 books in the series, Betsy and Joe, Betsy and the Great World, and Betsy's Wedding when I was growing up. Surely I would have if only I'd known about them. I read them recently for the first time, and I was nervous as I opened the first page. What if the stories didn't hold up well? What if I couldn't imagine girls today caring about Betsy? But I didn't have to worry. I was swept into Betsy's life, the way I had been years ago. And by the time I read the final pages of the last book, I was crying so hard that my husband, oh my God, I am so sorry. Okay, straighten up, Lindy, straighten up. Okay, I was crying so hard. I was crying so hard that my husband thought something terrible had happened. I explained it wasn't sadness. I explained it wasn't sadness that was making me cry. It was finding friends I thought I'd lost. A whole generation of girls my age came to feel that Betsy was their friend. It's comforting to know that no matter how many years go by, no matter how things are different today. What's inside us is still the same. And what makes a good book hasn't changed either. Some characters become your friends for life. That's how it was for me with Betsy and Tacy. And it's about Judy Blume. Oh, I feel so silly. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Let's turn the camera off because I am a mess. All right. I'm going to make it. If any of y'all are my age, did you ever watch Saturday Night Live? Was it Mike Myers who played Linda Richmond? And she would have Barbara Streisand on the show, and but he was playing a woman. He would say, "I'm getting a little verklempt. Talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you a topic." Well, anyway, that's what I felt like. All right, now let me tell you. Just like Judy Blume, I wasn't sad. I was not sad. I promise you, I was not sad. There is, and I hope that y'all don't think I'm a nut. And I hope I haven't upset anybody either. I want you to know that books have the power to do that to you, especially if you get introduced to those books as a child. That's why I am telling you, you have to introduce those babies to books early. And foster that love, foster it to them. Even if you have to read aloud to them, even if they don't like reading themselves, it's okay. Read to them. They will listen. They will love that you're spending time with them. My boys, I had envisioned a lovely scenario where my children would sit all around me in a little circle and just enjoy my book reading. Well, they didn't. My daughter only did that because boys are boys, and they were wild, and they didn't want to sit. But listen, that's okay, because those boys still heard everything. They'd be jumping around me. They'd be rolling on the floor. They'd be playing with their trains in the floor in their cars, and they'd be making them jump ramps, and I would want to tell them to be quiet and listen. But they did listen, and they could verbatim tell me word for word what I had just read, even as they were playing. So even if you have wild boys, if you have a wild girl, it doesn't matter. Read anyway. And I promise you, those books and those stories that they read or you read to them will affect them profoundly when they get older, in a good way, in a good way. Okay, so let's read just the first chapter of this, and I don't think we'll get in trouble for copyright for just the first chapter, and if I can find a way around this, I will. And I promise no crying. All right, so y'all can close your pretty eyes and try to fall asleep to this sound. This is chapter 1, Betsy Meets Tacy. It was difficult later to think of a time when Betsy and Tacy had not been friends. Hill Street came to regard them almost as one person. Betsy's brown braids went with Tacy's red curls, Betsy's plump legs with Tacy's spindly ones. To school and from school, uphill and down, on errands and in play, so that when Tacy had the mumps and Betsy was obliged to make her journeys alone, saucy boys teased her. "Where's the cheese, apple pie? Where's your mush, milk?" As though she didn't feel lonesome enough already, and Hill Street knew when Sunday came, even without listening to the rolling bells, for Betsy Ray and Tacy Kelly, whose parents attended different churches, set off down Hill Street separately, looking uncomfortable and strange. But on this March afternoon, a month before Betsy's 5th birthday, they didn't know each other. They had not even seen each other unless Betsy had glimpsed Tacy without knowing her. For Tacy, among the children of assorted sizes moving into the house across the street. Betsy had been kept in because of bad weather, and all day she had sat with her nose pressed against the pane. It was exciting beyond words to have a family with children moving into that house. Hill Street was rightfully named. It ran straight up into a green hill and stopped. The name of the town was Deep Valley, and a town named Deep Valley naturally had plenty of hills. Betsy's house, a small yellow cottage, was the last house on her side of Hill Street, and the rambling white house opposite was the last house on that side. So, of course, it was very important, and it had been empty ever since Betsy could remember. Whoever moves in will have children, Betsy's mother had said. Well, for Pete's sake, said Betsy's father, Hill Street is so full of children now that old Mag has to watch out where she puts her foot down. I know, said Betsy's mother, there are plenty of children for Julia. Julia was Betsy's sister, 8 years old, and dozens of babies, but there isn't just one little girl just Betsy's age, and that's what I'm hoping will come to the house across the street. That was what Betsy hoped too, and that was what she'd been watching for all day as she sat at the dining room window. She was certain there must be such a little girl. There were girls of almost every size and boys to match milling about the moving dray and in and out of the house, but she wasn't sure. She hadn't absolutely seen one. So they're talking about horses when they talk about old Mag, and they talk about drays because this was back in the horse and buggy days. So she had watched all day, and now the dining room was getting dark. Julie had stopped practicing her music lessons, and Mrs. Ray had lighted the lamp in the kitchen. The March snow lay cold and dirty outside the window, but the wind had died down, and the western sky behind the house opposite was stained with red. The furniture had been carried in, and the dray was gone. A light was shining in the house. Suddenly, the front door opened, and a little girl ran out. She wore a hood beneath, which had long red ringlets spattered out above her coat. Her legs and the long black stockings were thin. It was Tacy, although Betsy didn't know it. She ran first to the hitching block and bounced there on her toes a minute, looking up at the sky and all around. Then she ran up the road to the point where it ended on the hill. Some long-gone person had placed a bench there. It commanded the view down Hill Street. The little girl climbed up on the bench and looked intently into the dark. I know just how she feels, thought Betsy with a throb. This is her new home. She wants to see what it's like. She ran to her mother. Mama, she cried, there's a little girl my age. Please let me go out. Just a minute, please. Mrs. Ray was moved by the entreaty. She looked out at the color sky. It does seem to be clearing up, she said, but you can only stay a minute. Do you want to go to the bother of putting on your things? Oh, yes, yes. Overshoes and mittens and everything? Yes, really. Betsy flew to the closet but she could not find her hood. The mittens were twisted on that string inside of her coat. Mama, help me, please. She'll be gone. Help her, Julia, called Betsy's mother, and Julia helped and at last the hood was tied and the coat buttoned and the overshoes buckled and the mittens pulled on. Outside the air was fresh and cold. The street lamp had been lighted. It was exciting just to be out at this hour, even without the prospect of meeting the little girl. But the new little girl stood still on the bench looking down the street. Betsy ran toward her. She ran on the sidewalk as far as it went. Then she took to the frozen, ruddy road, and she almost reached the bench when the little girl saw her. Hello, called Betsy. What's your name? The little child made no answer. She jumped off the bench. Don't go, cried Betsy. I'm coming. But the other child, without a word, began to run. She brushed past Betsy on her headlong flight down the hill. She ran like a frightened rabbit, and Betsy ran in pursuit. Wait, wait, Betsy panted as she ran, but the new child would not stop. On fleet, black-stockinged legs, she ran faster than Betsy could follow. Wait, wait, pleaded Betsy, but the child did not turn her head. She gained her own lawn, floundered through the snow to her house. The entrance to her house was through a storm shed. She ran into this and banged the door. The door had a pane of glass in the front, and through that pane she stared fearfully at Betsy. Betsy stood still, winking back tears, a mittened finger in her mouth. At last she turned and trudged slowly back through the dark snow to her house. She had almost reached her porch when The door of the storm shed opened. The new little girl stuck out her head. "Tacy," she shouted. "You needn't call names," Betsy shouted back. Tacy was shouting her own name, really, but it was such an odd one, Betsy didn't understand. She trudged into the house. A lamp hanging over the dining room table was lighted now. A delicious smell of fried potatoes floated from the kitchen. "Well," her mother called out cheerfully, "did you get acquainted?" "What's her name?" asked Julia. "I don't know. I don't like her. I'm mad at her," said Betsy. It was all she could do to not cry. That was as near as Betsy and Tacy ever came to a quarrel, and of course it didn't count, for they weren't friends yet. They began to be friends next month in April at Betsy's birthday party. So that is the end of chapter 1. And then chapter 2, of course, is Betsy's birthday party. So again, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I believe I have the entire collection of the Betsy-Tacy-Tib books. And so if you're interested in these, I'm sure, again, you can get them from Amazon or from thrift books or from discarded library sales. That's the best place to get them if you can find them there. Check with your local library if you have a library card and find out when they're having their discarded library sales, and be sure to go to them because I have picked up some of the best old books from those sales. So anyway, all right, my friends, thank you again for being here. And you know, my channel anniversary, we've missed it. I completely just let it slide by and didn't acknowledge it, but we celebrated a year being here together. And so I want to thank you for sticking around with me and giving this channel a chance and being so kind in the comments and just letting me know different things that you're thinking about or how you feel or what you liked and what you didn't like and how I can improve. I have improved in lots of ways and other ways I haven't, but it all takes time, I guess, to make improvements in one's life. Anyway, thank you again so much for just the kindness that you all have expressed to me over this year. I do really appreciate you, and I don't take that for granted. And thank you again for bearing with me as I cried like some crazy old lady. Oh my gosh. Don't be sad. Please don't be sad. They were happy tears. They were happy tears. All right, my friends, I love you, and I can't wait to see you on the next video. Don't forget, Friday we've got another field trip, and it's a good one. See you soon.